Now, as we enter an age of absolute illusion, wherein the ones who control the technology that controls perception will be the ultimate masters, the number one thing we need, the number one skill we should have, is discernment of the truth. But a person who doesn't know the truth can't discern the truth. And the thing is about all of us, we assume that we know the truth, or at the very least that we can tell the difference between lies and truth. And depending on who we are, that's true from one degree or another. But as we've learned from things like COVID, or the Gulf War, 9/11, and even the most current Israeli aggression against 7, or I guess at this point, because they've declared it, 8 different countries, including the U.S., the wars and the manipulations can cause and or result in actual death. People can lose their livelihoods, they can lose their lives, they can lose their health, they can lose all chance to do well for themselves. No one wants this. No one wants to lose everything. But in truth, losing everything is losing your life. And it's not always down to that. But certainly in the 21st century, not knowing the truth, not knowing what it is that makes a manipulation versus a coercion, or a coercion from a nudging, or a nudging from advising. Not knowing these things, you could find yourself being nudged or pushed into doing something that either destroys your health, or destroys your life, or destroys both when it comes to the ones you love. None of us would want that. Of course not. We've seen how governments and corporations, mainly the two united now, work in concert with their friends in the media apparatus, which they also fund and control. They do all these things to create storms of information, media blitzes. And when that happens, my friend, you're almost always assured of a psyop, or what they call a psychological operation. In fact, psychological operations happen all the time, as we know. But when it comes to manipulating a grand population, a large group of people, it calls for a large reach. And the only way they can do that is if they use all channels, if they use all assets. And so, when you see the development of a narrative, a story, it doesn't matter what that story is, and it sure as hell doesn't matter if it jives with what you believe or not. When you see that story multiplying and echoing throughout the halls of the establishment, whether it's military, the industrial base, religion, government, any sort of official channels, and one of the biggest indicators nowadays, the chosen, so-called, not informers, but influencers. People who choose to be called that name, who like being called that name, because they have influence. And when you have influence, you have power. There are many types of power in this world, and we've gone over them before. I actually did an entire video on power not too long ago. But in short, power is where energy pools, where it comes together. It's a nexus or a confluence of various streams of energy that come and unite in one place. Thus, the attempts of certain groups, corporations, religions, and governments to put a cap on it, So we have the perfect example of, for example, a well. A well opens up on someone's land. They have energy at that well. And that energy can be distributed, it can be hoarded. And when that well isn't just water, which is a precious energy anyway, it can be distributed for the growth of life and the maintenance and sustaining of life. When that well is something else, like a well of metal, what we would call a vein of precious metals, for example. We call that a mine, but a mine is the same as a well, because it is essentially a power nexus. Exploiting that mine, exploiting those veins, yields power, and that aggregated energy, where it has pooled, where it has coalesced, can empower an individual. And that person can either scatter it away frivolously or can use it to build a power base. Power coming together in the form of crude oil. That we call a well as well, a well of oil. And we mine that well. We probe it and we drain it. And when a person has such a well, various companies who are used to gathering power unto themselves, taking it out, refining it, and selling it back to the population, make themselves even more rich, generally by purchasing such an aggregate of energy, what we would call raw power. All power that comes from the earth ultimately comes from the sun. The sun sheds its light upon the earth, and that light gets turned into various forms of solids, but also gases, liquids, and the like, shed from that sun, and other cosmic energies, no doubt, accumulated in certain wells and veins on the earth. These things once capped, once grabbed. A group of people now own power. They've gathered it to themselves, and they can turn that power through an act of alchemy into even more power through the purchase of people power. Political power ultimately is people power. And if you want influence in the world, which is a form of power, it's a form of people power, you have to convert some form of power into that people power. Nowadays, groups do this by paying for it, or by paying someone to speak in the ears of the people and convert them, control them, shape them the way they want. Thus, we have influencers, a rare and precious commodity, one which they will try to compromise if they haven't created it from the get-go. And most of these people, the ones who have hundreds and thousands, hundreds of thousands and millions of so-called followers, which is a demeaning thing to call someone, in my opinion, just like influencer is. It posits from the get-go that they have ill intent, that they intend to influence rather than educate, influence rather than enliven or encourage or inspire. Influencers should be looked at very cautiously and carefully. It doesn't matter who they are, and it doesn't matter how much you like them. It doesn't matter if they're a so-called whistleblower. It doesn't matter if they're on your side of the aisle. If a person speaks the truth, they could be a monster, a rapist, a murderer. They're still speaking the truth. Just because someone is dressed up and claims to be a Christian doesn't mean that they are. Dressed up and put in front of you to be some sort of right-wing, hardcore, fascist, it doesn't mean that they are. In fact, most of the time when people claim these titles, associate themselves with it, and give you every symbol and reason to believe that they are that, that easily explained thing, that little category in your mind. It's because they are not that. The ones who run around parading that they are the moral superiors of everyone else are almost always the moral degenerates of our world. The things that they tell you are the greatest good are almost always not that. Just as when they tell you this is a great crime, almost always it's not. A crime, perhaps, but a great one? Consider the fact that they consider rape to be way worse than murder, because the person has to live with that. That's generally the excuse they give you. Well, they have to live with it. For the rest of their lives, they have to live with it. Surmounting our past and the traumas with that past doesn't make us an eternal victim. It makes us a conqueror. We conquer ourselves, we gain wisdom and strength, and we become better. We arise like the phoenix out of our old ashes and our old body. So someone defeating the fear and the trauma associated with getting beat or raped or molested or imprisoned, tortured, someone who does that becomes a better person. Like separating the dross from a metal, they become hammered out in time, a better, stronger form of metal. To perfect oneself, to conquer oneself, and especially one's weaknesses, is the greatest thing one can do, because what arises from that is will. And to a people who are largely robbed of their own will, certainly robbed of their volition in most cases, such a thing is not offered. Such a thing they make taboo and forbidden. You are not allowed to grow in will, therefore claim victimhood status. And in order to do that, they have to say that showing rape, for example, or molestation, or in many cases imprisonment and torture in a movie is just too much for your childlike brain to deal with. Instead, they'll show you every form of violent murder on earth, which, let's be real here, murder ends you completely. There is no chance to rise above it, to become better, to grow in strength, to grow in wisdom, to defeat your own fear, to surmount your own trauma. That is taken from you on top of what has been done to you. So though a crime, not showing that molestation can happen to someone, or rape, or abduction, or imprisonment, or torture, robs the human mind of considering such a thing. It also makes such a thing a taboo golden calf, something to never be touched but only to be worshipped from afar. Worshipped as the greatest evil or the greatest good, it matters not. When a people is not allowed to see whatever they are, whoever they are, when they're not allowed to see good or evil, they become blind to whatever it is. Now, you may disagree with me, but you might want to consider whether or not that's your opinion, or it's the one that's been implanted in you. The powers that be, and this includes every corporation, working in collusion with the military apparatus, the state apparatus, and religions, are working to turn you and your family into slaves, a slave class and a slave species. And to do that, they are robbing you of your volition and your will. And this is mainly done by removing the things that will make you stronger. You are not allowed to see certain things because those things are evil. Are they now? If they're so evil, why do you show me worse things? Why do you show me actual people being blown up and ripped to shreds, but I can't see someone getting touched in the wrong way? Why? Because you're a child, and you're not allowed to see a crime. The establishment will tell you, and you must believe them. So this is a form of teaching and learning. This is slave training. How do you know that she was abducted? Are you allowed to see the cell? Will they show you tapes that the police have confiscated of her being imprisoned or raped or beaten? No, you won't be shown any of that because you're a child. And it doesn't matter if you're 15 or 50. You could be 89, they still consider you to be a child because that's what they're grooming you to be. In the 1970s, late 70s especially, and the 1980s, there were certain comics that were, or rather cartoons that were released to the public, which now they ban almost entirely. And they ban them and refuse to show them because they're growing future generations to be little pansy shitheads. You know what I mean? All they're able to see are curated, cutified, ridiculous little simplified stories. Nothing that would upset them. Nothing that would make them grow. But things which will keep them like the Teletubbies, forever in a state of perpetual childhood. There's only one excuse why that garbage Harry Potter appealed to so many. It's because they were brought down to a childish level, where a place called Hogwarts would be acceptable as a sorcery institute, where a sorcerer by the name of Dumbledore is just fine with them, where a kid named Harry Potter is somehow an amazing magician. I understand it for first graders, but for people in their teens, in their 20s, and older. Now, there's nothing wrong with indulging in something childish, but this thing getting the degree to which it was spread and accepted by adults and passed on. This was no collection of fables like we used to have. No, this is a brand new one, cobbled together by not a very good writer in my opinion, but at the very least someone with a lot of will and ambition. There are many examples of this nowadays, and we look at things like the old cartoons from the 70s and 80s and how they involved death and war. For example, you had things like Robotech and G.I. Joe, which would show war, actual war, and people would die. Not so much in G.I. Joe, but certainly Robotech. There were things that took place that had consequences. And when a growing mind realizes that, they start applying it to their own world. I could be killed. I could be captured if we don't fight this alien race, or whatever they are. In the case of G.I. Joe, these terrorists, they were priming us even back then, could win and enslave my family. These things make a person think about acting to stop evil. But when you're not given that, and all you're given are fluffy bunny garbage, silly little cutified characters who don't actually do anything and carp endlessly about loving each other and why people don't and how mean they are, well, you know that you're being groomed to be the eternal victim. So that maybe others won't be able to surprise you and kill you so easily, but the government sure as hell will. In a society which they've sterilized and made safe, and put up cameras everywhere, sure, the average person may not abduct you off the street, but the groups who are working together to blind you and make you a slave, well, they sure as hell can. Or they can convince you to inject things into your arms that'll kill you. They can convince you to spend endless amounts of your money in pursuit of a war you don't need because they fed into your head the idea of an enemy you've never met. When a people aren't allowed to see the truth, they can't see the truth. When they're not allowed to think for themselves, when they're not given the trust of an adult and allowed to make up their own minds with what they can see or say or think. Nope, can't put that in the AI. That's verboten. Why is it verboten? Because it's illegal. It's illegal now to show this person getting killed? Yes, because that could actually cause them to be killed. Nothing should be illegal as pertains something fake. Ridiculous. It's ridiculous that anything real being shown, like, for example, someone's actual killing. Now, we would hope people would not want that to happen, but they should have the right to see it if it's caught on film. It is a very hard thing to find the wisdom within oneself to understand when the time is right to censor and when it is not. The truth of the matter is, and you have to come to this yourself, there is no right time to censor. Censorship belongs for slaves. It belongs to them, and it's for them. Censoring the truth, hiding the truth, applying a sticker of top secret, for your eyes only, military access, above top secret. All these things, this is only for them. This isn't for you. Implies that you are lesser than someone else. And these distinctions, once accepted by your brain, engender a state of slavery. The truth is the most important thing for you to discern nowadays, and for that you have to be brutally honest. You have to be honest about where you've been taught not to look, and where you've been taught to look, where you're being pushed and where you're being pulled. You have to reckon with the fact that most people who claim that they're against certain things are actually for it. And when they claim to be enemies, they're actually friends. So where does that leave you? The one thing that can raise you above all the traps is a pursuit of truth, a love for the truth, a longing for that truth, the light in the darkness that dispels the murk, because it's true. Forget about all the things that inflate your ego, or make you feel better, or pad the truth, or twist it to fit your own little preference. If it be true, then it be true. Accept it. And move on. It doesn't matter if it's about you or your ancestors, your gender, your race, your past, or your future. Doesn't matter if it's about something you love or you hate. Your favorite things. Accept the truth. And once you start accepting the truth, it suddenly becomes easier to spot. That's all I'm going to say about it for now. There are many, many paths in this world to wisdom. But all of them, and I mean all of them, and the ancients knew this, all of them involve following, like a lantern, following the truth down the path of experience. The truth won't just set you free. It'll cure you of blindness. And that's the thing we need the most if we're going to survive in this new era.